Hi. I'm trying to make sure. I'm out of here. You're good? That space.
I gotta make sure it's running downstairs. I'll start streaming tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
That's why we
And then when I see
I just went through all of the pages and there were very consistent comments that seem to continue the verbiage being used.
Right, you got some for us.
I'll just leave that extra there.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
so you it's a barcode and
It's the long number, yeah.
Unfortunately, I couldn't find out. It's not the way it was, the way, unfortunately, in hindsight, the way this was very problematic from a statistical evaluation. So I just
success.
went through what was in and the best I could fully comment these, the number of comments, scores every.
Great. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, yes, fine.
These were done very well. That's very temporary. So it was just staff kind of playing with some of the aspects.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Well,
But I've had it for the soccer game. Went to either town
They say they hired a third party. 9 minutes? Are you moving over to Sanders? No? For the public? Okay, so he knows what he's doing. He's doing what's on the head. Okay, so he's doing safe. Yeah, no, right. That was not happening. Yeah, I really, somehow I thought, okay, cool. You know, and then the next time, like, I was like, you're saying that that's not true. Okay. So, for that example, where we took a picture because we didn't have to.
Yeah, it's fun. We still got some couple things.
My tree's still there. My light's not really sure. They'll probably be up all year.
Good, how are you? Happy New Year.
You've been so busy. The production was awesome.
Yes, it was. Yeah, we got standing ovations on final performance night. Yeah. Thank you.
What was that funky crazy store you went to? It had all the Japanese items.
Oh, it's in Pacific Mall. Walgreens Mall. There's hundreds of stores there. And there was one of the small steakhouse very close to Pacific Mall. And then there's China, like 3 Asian shops. I'm going to Japan in 2020. Yeah, spring of 2020 to celebrate my 50th birthday. So, yeah. Are you yes, you are. I'm not. I'll be 50 in April of 2020. That is not. Yeah.
You have some bullshit or something.
I think so. Like it's my birth certificate, but that's what it says. I know. I always use those games in front of the rare. The gift your age game, I always let them do that.
No, it's really
You gave back, sister.
No, we're focusing on getting that back. So we start this Wednesday night back out. That's what we're doing for the holidays. So it'd be funny if you say that would be amazing. Because there is a team of like town staff from Mississauga that comes in fairly regularly. Yeah, including deputy clerk and the communications person. And yeah, they sometimes the fire chief comes out to piece of play. So yeah, you guys should get a town staff team going. Yeah, so we don't know. We're just going to focus on Mississauga for right now. Yeah. Maybe. I mean, it is okay right now, but people are, some meetings have been canceled, like, they called me, so they're canceling. There's still random work, that's probably why it is. Vision board last year. And it went well. It did. That's a lot. So it was my whole weekend. But yeah, it was and then the matinee, Saturday and Sunday, really good audience, really receptive to all jokes. And then yeah, we're getting on a live performance. It's worth it. Yeah, we did it. It's hard to around this.
We're set to make sure too the volume is up for it. We had a YouTube video during the inauguration of it. I don't know like the sound for this.
It should.
It's always.
It's picking up the room.
Okay.
And they put out the audition call in June. I don't know. And then performed all weekend long. It was really super fun, and I missed the people. I love being on capacity, but we're all made for different things. I don't know, I think I was just made to be better. So people, when we were at our company party, almost ended up in town. I was up there. But I was on my way for it. Yeah. And I don't even need to know. I do it all. Although people have to think that like to do that. That's not really what I was saying.
This is a sign sheet too.
Yeah. In purchasing some sales. They'll be there on opening. Ian, thank you for your response.
No problem.
That's what we had said, usually you just. Oh, but I don't know, we couldn't get it, like, equal for us. Yeah, it like, cut out.
All right, it's 5. Is this on? Is this on? Okay. All right, it's 5 o'clock, so we'll call this standing Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting to order. I will look for an adoption of the agenda for tonight, and that is that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for January 7, 2019 be adopted as presented. Let's do Deputy Mayor move it.
So moved.
And I need a seconder. Councilor Berman, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. One going into the cannabis business. All right. If it does arise during the course of the meeting, please let me know. Deputations. Any deputations from the floor before we get into the agenda tonight? Seeing none, we'll get to staff reports. 5.1, consideration of cannabis retail stores in Collingwood. I'll look to you, Clerk Gomez, to carry that one for us. Thank you.
Certainly. So we put together a team that's going to be presenting the cannabis report tonight. So I'll have Martin provide a brief introduction.
Thank you, Sarah. Mayor Saunders, Council, members of the public. As Sarah mentioned, this has been a multi-departmental effort that we've been working on now for quite some time. And what's important, the issue at hand that this covers off is the question of allowing retailing in Collingwood or not. The higher levels of government have obviously been playing a major role in terms of cannabis and legalization in Canada and the province, but this is specifically about retailing in Collingwood. We certainly encourage people to stay informed in terms of what happens today. The decision is not being made today. That is something that's obviously being made at the January 14th council presentation. But we do encourage people to stay informed as people come and present, as they are leaving afterwards. We encourage them to sign up on the sheet to my left so that they can continue to stay informed about what's going on. There's an email that will be going out with further information. In terms of the overview that staff plans to present to you today, certainly the staff report has a lot of the core information included in there. You will see that there is going to be a presentation about the changing legislative landscape, and this continues to change literally on a weekly basis. So I think staff has done an excellent job in terms of summarizing some of the key changes that have been happening so that we can stay informed. Extensive consultations have been done, that will be summarized, as well as the survey results will be shared. The various options will be presented. And then we'll fall into the public meeting where it's actually a chance for the public to come and express their perspective. Importantly, it is not a debate. It is for presenting your opinion for council to then consider over the course of the next week. And of course, the council decision will be happening on January 14th, 1 week from today. With that, I wanted to pass on information with regards to the background to planning. Sure.
Or do we have the... So a bit of a background to the presentation this evening is, if you move to the third slide, please. So this slide here. So this slide actually identifies the federal and the provincial milestones that's happened to date. So you can see that it's happened fairly quickly. So it was introduced in April of of 2017, the federal government agreed to proceed in June of 2018. And once the new Ontario government was sworn in June of 2018, they've made some drastic changes that became in effect as of September 27th, 2018. And of that, one of the significant items is what we're dealing with tonight, and that is regarding retail outlets and whether they are permitted within the various municipal jurisdictions across the province. And if your municipality does choose to opt in, and now we'll get into some additional changes that have happened, that date for those successful applicants that want to host a retail outlet or in an eligible municipality will have to open effective April the 1st of this year. So our next slide. This is just a bit of a background regarding the initial report that was presented to council in October. So it reviewed again this background of the legalization of cannabis. It outlined council's obligations with respect to this opt-in or opt-out date by January 22nd, 2019. And at that point, we knew that we were just before the municipal election. So staff requested council's direction on whether they wish us to proceed through a very deliberative consultation process during this transition, knowing it's going to be a significant decision that's going to be made for this new term of council. So council provided that direction to staff, and staff have been undertaking a number of consultation pieces that have led us here to this evening. But one piece of that staff report that did come forward and was approved was with respect to the banning of advertising and sponsorship of recreational use of cannabis or sales or promotions on any municipal property, facility, or event that takes place. And that is similar to the tobacco advertising and sponsorship prohibition as well. So again, this is just saying that this legal landscape has changed very rapidly. As I said, the most significant change happened on September 27th of 2018, and that's where they began to compare cannabis to tobacco rather than cannabis being compared to alcohol. So again, right now, cannabis can be consumed anywhere that you can smoke tobacco within the province. There's a number of areas within this legislation that's very ambiguous. So the province is fully aware of this. They admit to this. They know that they're going to be doing regular monitoring throughout the process. One of the areas is they don't know how popular and the demand is going to happen. There's no limits right now on outlets within your municipality. So you could have 10 side by side. If they feel this is becoming a problem, then they will start to regulate it. As you can see, the Act, since the changes in September, have undergone a number of regulatory changes since that point, as well as this most recent issue that occurred in December. In December, I believe it was 13th, is whenever the province noted that the supply of cannabis was lacking in the province and they would not be able to supply an unlimited amount of retailers within the province. They've limited to a certain number, which I will have Lindsay get into during her discussions.
So in terms of the information we have before us today on cannabis retail stores in the province of Ontario, we know that retail stores cannot be located in a municipality that chooses to opt out by January 22nd of 2019. They cannot be located within 150 meters of a school or a private school as defined by the Education Act. They must be a standalone store. The province has defined, there's a number of specifications as what determines a standalone store, but essentially they have to be enclosed by walls separating it from any other commercial establishment, and they can only sell cannabis, cannabis accessories, and shopping bags. So you cannot purchase cannabis and granola bars or potato chips. It has to be a standalone store, but it's focused strictly on the sale of recreational cannabis. As Sarah alluded to, right now there's no limit on the number of retail stores that may be located in a municipality. The province is leaving store concentration to market demand to essentially influence how many stores end up in various communities that agree to permit them. The licensing will be regulated by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. It cannot be further controlled by the municipality through business licensing or zoning. And that's a very important piece that came out of the legislation as it was announced in the fall. So in terms of the zoning, it's important to note that a municipality cannot distinguish between a use of land, a building, or a structure that includes the sale of cannabis versus a use of land, a building, or a structure that does not include the use of or the sale of cannabis. So we can't distinguish between one store and another, essentially. So there's been some interesting discussion in terms of our commercial zoning and how that will play out as the application process goes forward. As Sarah also alluded to, due to supply issues, on December 13th of 2018, the province announced that it is going to restrict the number of retail outlets across the province to 25 in phase 1. It's important to note that the 25 stores that will be authorized must be located in municipalities with populations of 50,000 people or greater. So Collingwood will not be seeing a store in our municipality as part of phase 1. And we at this point have no information as to when or how the province is going to roll out subsequent phases in terms of retail stores. So following Council's direction to staff to engage in public consultation, a staff task force was established, including representatives from planning and building services, marketing and business development, clerk services, and bylaw enforcement. We held a number of stakeholder consultations in the fall and leading into the new year. A public survey was launched on November 30th and was available to the public to complete up until December 31st of last year. We received a number of written public comments over and above the survey comments we received. Municipal representatives also attended the Chamber of Commerce's cannabis event that was held in mid-December. And of course, we have the public meeting this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Tammy to discuss the survey results.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. For most of you who know me, my name is Officer Baker. I'm with the Town of Collingwood Bylaw Enforcement Department. I'm just going to go over some of the survey results for you. So the Collingwood launched our survey on November the 30th, and that ran until December the 31st. A total of 1,420 people participated in this survey. Some of the results for the survey, one of the questions was, do you support for retail stores in Collingwood? The results are 72% support retail stores in Collingwood, 22% opposed, and 1% was unknown. We also have some stats for people who prefer to purchase online opposed to storefront. 4.93% prefer to purchase online. 66.69% would prefer to purchase through a storefront store. 24.44% have no intention of purchasing cannabis, and 3.94% don't know. One of the survey questions was, if retail stores are allowed in Collingwood, are you concerned if they are located close to any of the following?
An important piece to this pertains to the policy piece that we're going to be talking about. So in this, municipalities have the ability to provide comment on licensing applications. And so there's only 3 items that the municipality can comment on. So that's a matter of public health and safety, that's a matter of protecting youth and restricting their access to cannabis, and the third component is trying to remove any illicit crime or activity related to cannabis use. So in looking at the results to this, it was quite interesting. So we can see too that the areas of significant concern amongst the participants in the survey, so 1,400 people, which is quite a significant number, are the schools, which is being regulated, parks and playgrounds, youth facilities, daycares, and addiction centers. But areas that they're not concerned with include religious or cultural institutions, public transit, which public transit is consistent with what other municipalities are noticing as well, and what was actually being promoted by the OPP, because one of their biggest concerns is obviously the impairment of driving while under the influence of any sort of drug. So they're actually encouraging retail outlets close to public transit areas. Again, the high-density residential areas, there wasn't as much concern with that component as well.
So one of the other survey results that I'd like to speak about is one of the questions was, Ontario has decided to allow the smoking of cannabis anywhere where tobacco can be consumed. Municipalities can enact bylaws to provide further restrictions on municipal property. 59% do not feel that the town should put any further restrictions for smoking, vaping of cannabis on municipal property. Due to the unknown of concerns that may arise, the town of Collingwood will be monitoring sensitive areas within the municipality to determine if further restrictions should be enacted. The Smoke-Free Act of Ontario prohibits the smoking of tobacco, the use of electronic cigarettes, which includes e-cigarettes, to vape any substance, and the smoking of cannabis, medical and recreational, in enclosed workplace and enclosed public places, as well as other designated places in Ontario to protect workers and the public from secondhand smoke. So within the Act, there are certain restrictions with regards to where cannabis can be smoked from parks and schools and stuff like that. And Lindsay.
So staff received a large number of comments throughout the public engagement process. The survey itself, one of the questions required you to provide a comment. So we had over 1,400 comments from that capacity alone. We also received written correspondence and had comments that came out of the stakeholder consultations. There was really no statistical way to weight or evaluate which comments were statistically more relevant or weighted heavier than others, but having sifted through 1,400 plus comments, there were clearly some common themes or comments that tended to recur over and over again. So we've just pulled a sample of comments that were received in favor of cannabis retail stores as well as opposed to cannabis retail stores. Understanding that, to be completely transparent, all of the comments through the survey were appended to the staff report, so council can see exactly how many comments of each type came out if the appetite is there to go through all of those pages, but unfortunately we couldn't statistically come up with a number. But in terms of typical comments in favor, improved convenience and access to safe recreational cannabis. A number of people felt it helps to combat illegal cannabis sales and criminal activity in the municipality. A number of comments were around new business opportunities, employment opportunities, job creation, driving traffic into areas where cannabis stores are located. There was also some commentary on the increased privacy of purchasers' personal information, as well as the accessibility for individuals to purchase cannabis that may not have a credit card or access to the online store. And a number of comments as well recognizing that cannabis is now legal and it should be treated no differently than having access to the liquor store, the beer store, the sale of alcohol in grocery stores, etc. Comments on for those opposed to cannabis retail stores in the municipality. A number of people felt there were absolutely no benefits to allowing cannabis stores in Collingwood. There was concern over the normalization of behavior of consuming cannabis, especially in front of youth. There's the potential for additional enforcement costs and potentially other costs that may result from the increased use of cannabis in the community. There is definitely concern over proximity of stores to sensitive land uses and the concentration of stores and the fact that municipalities won't have control over that. And there was concern over the consumption of cannabis in public spaces, being parks, trails, public recreation facilities, etc. So I I also want to stress the Chamber of Commerce did offer an official position on recreational cannabis retail stores. A lot of that position was also captured in the comments I just went through, so I didn't restate it, but they are in favor of recreational cannabis retail stores in the municipality. Some of the other key stakeholders that provided commentary were the Simcoe Municipal District Health Unit. Just before the holidays, they provided a public health guidance for municipalities on the implementation of legalization of cannabis, and that was appended as a resource to the staff report. The health unit has also indicated support for the notion of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario's policy statement for municipalities to try to craft and formulate comments that would reflect concerns about sensitive land uses and things of that nature. And they also support strengthening restrictions as to where you can consume or vape or smoke or vape cannabis in the municipality. And just today, the Collingwood General Marine Hospital also provided some general health-related information pertaining to the use of recreational cannabis. Most of the information centered on the potential health impacts of cannabis, especially as it relates to youth and young adults. Some of the information covered is that 17 is the median age of when individuals tend to initiate using cannabis. However, our brains are still developing until we're 25 years old. So there is concern over the impacts of cannabis on development in young adults. They also, the information covered common and acute long-term cognitive effects, including impaired motor coordination and reaction time, impaired judgment, inattentiveness and challenges in problem solving, and mental health issues such as schizophrenia that can result from regular use of recreational cannabis. They also spoke to the concerns over addiction and problematic use of cannabis. The risk is 1 in 11 for recreational cannabis users to develop an addiction or a problematic use, and that risk increases to 1 in 6 for those who start using recreational cannabis as teenagers. And then finally, they did provide a copy of Canada's lower risk cannabis use guidelines endorsed by the Canadian Medical Association and Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health in Principle. Again, we just received that information today, so we can certainly provide it again.
I think also to be clear, during our conversations with the various groups, they didn't have official positions on this. So for example, the health unit didn't have an official position to share with the municipality whether you should opt in or opt out. It's a municipality decision, they were leaving it that. They have concerns about smoking, any type of smoking anywhere. So they were providing that comment. And same with the hospital's feedback that we received today. They're providing this comment because within their health correspondence that they provided to us, they said that there's a direct correlation between density of retail use to the consumption. So they said the more retailers we have, it is, I guess, statistically proven that that will show an increase of consumption. So that's why the comments from the health unit are identified like this.
So just going back to the provincial regulation and potentially where retail stores locate, the truly only real restriction if the town chooses to opt in is the 150-meter buffer from schools, which we'll show you in a moment. But given the public interest being the focal point of ensuring that, you know, where these stores are located is in the public interest of municipalities, we've just created a map that shows the various commercial zones within the town of Collingwood. The C1 and C2 zones, which are shown in red on the map, there where general retail commercial establishments are permitted use in Collingwood, and I think certainly from planning services perspective, that is where we would prefer to see these types of retail uses go. But again, because the province has not made any real distinction as to what commercial is, what a store is, what a retail store is, potentially we could see applications in any of the commercial zones. Again, we would have an opportunity as a municipality to provide comments. Zoning comments could certainly form those comments that we would provide in response to an application. But again, we can only provide comments. We cannot control where these stores will physically be located. Next slide. So this, as I just spoke to, this is the only guaranteed prohibition of stores at this point in time based on the legislation. So these are all, the blue area indicates a buffer, 150-meter buffer around all of the current public and private schools in the municipality. At present, the private schools that we have that are registered with the Ministry of Education are Pretty River Academy and the National Ski Academy. So that is right now the only guaranteed areas where a recreational cannabis retail store would not be permitted. Now, previous to the legislation coming out, staff had done some very preliminary mapping, looking at other potential sensitive land uses, and clearly we have parks and schools and 150-meter buffer around there. I will note that some of the parks, especially along the waterfront, are not on this map. It was not intentional. These were very rough preliminary maps that we could refine in time, but these are the types of maps that we could use to help inform municipal comments in response to an application. But again, we do not have the authority to restrict a cannabis retail store within 150 meters of a park or of a recreational facility. That is just comments that we can provide if that is a concern of the municipality and the council. And the same goes for the following map. The 200-meter buffer, I believe, is what the school boards initially wanted. The province came back with 150 meters, but this shows an increased buffer and what it would potentially look like if we were to try to stress to the AGCO that we did not want them within X number of meters. But again, these are the types of things that we can use going forward if we proceed with a municipal cannabis policy statement that would help inform staff's comments to the AGCO in response to an application. And then just to keep the pulse on what's happening to date, it's very clear that a number of municipalities are going to be making the same decision within the next 2 weeks. As of today, on the AGCO website, a total of 23 municipalities have officially opted out of permitting cannabis stores. They will not permit cannabis retail stores in their municipality, and a total of 50 municipalities have opted in, or they have officially indicated to the AGCO that they will permit them. This is just kind of pulling some relevant municipalities. To give you an idea, the comprehensive list is available on the AGCO website, which is a resource attached to the staff report. Also, just to note, in Simcoe County, currently only 2 municipalities have passed resolutions, and that's Tate Township and the town of Wasaga Beach, and both have chosen to opt out. So our neighbors to the east of us will not be permitting cannabis retail stores. On that note, I will turn it back over to Sarah.
So what's being presented tonight for council, or I should say committee, and the public's consideration based on our staff report is looking at the 2 options, so opting in or opting out. So the province has actually identified that if you don't pass a resolution to opt out, that you're automatically opted in. Regardless, we're putting forward council to choose a position. And if council choose to go with the will of the public that we've received through our public consultation process and the opting in, that we would support, I'm not sure if it hasn't been discussed earlier, but AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, has come up with a policy statement template and process that they want municipalities to consider when choosing to opt in. So if council chooses to opt in, we would request that council approve a policy statement. Again, it's not a policy because we can't make a formal policy on something that is not, cannot be strictly adhered to. So again, our comments that we provide to the province on any applications they may receive from any retailers interested in locating within the town of Collingwood, if council chooses to opt in, they're only taken into consideration. So right now, the only restriction is the 150-meter buffer to schools. So as identified in the previous map, but if we have a policy statement that will provide some guidance, and secondly, what we're looking for is this delegated authority. Since this commenting time period is only 15 days, so from the date that the AGCO posts that they have an application within your municipality, It is our responsibility to find out that that information has been posted. They are not notifying municipalities specifically, so we'll have to have a staff member, hopefully within the planning department, that's looking after this. As delegated authority we're looking at is to the Director of Planning and Building Services, based on the primary concern being land use and sensitive land uses, commercial zones, that sort of discussion. However, what we want to have within the policy statement is some general statements saying that these are some of the areas that we believe are sensitive. So that's what we'd like to hear from the public this evening. We're going to be taking the information that we have from the survey. We've looked at it right now that since we do have some time period to adjust, that the policy statement that's been prepared is a very generic statement. We can add a map to it. As noted by Lindsay, the 150 meter in consultation with the school board, when we had a conversation with them, they were not happy with 150 meters, so we would go back to our initial, that map that we had prepared was back in October, of having a 200 meter buffer. So that's something that we could consider putting together in a map with our parks and other areas that fell within our survey components. But for the time being, we can keep a general policy statement, knowing that it's a living document and can be regularly changed. Once we see how other municipalities are dealing with it that are allowing retail outlets within their jurisdiction. Because we know that the first 25 licenses that will be provided are only going to municipalities of 50,000 or over in population. So we do have a little bit of time. Regardless, we're looking at the delegated authority as well, as I noted, to the Director of Planning and Business Building Services. However, this delegation of authority would be in consultation with other municipal departments, as well as the health unit has indicated their interest in participating in those comments. They would provide their comments. We wouldn't be setting up a formal meeting because there's not much time within 15 days. So basically, it would be similar to our event processing. So basically, we have one person that coordinates all the information. It's circulated to members of the consultation group that would include, we're recommending including the health unit. The health unit can provide their comments to us. We can choose to include their comments within our comments that we provide back to the AGCO. Regardless, it wouldn't restrict the health unit's ability to provide their own independent comments as well. The reason why they said that they would have this interest is there might be areas within the community that are integrated areas, such as shelters or addiction clinics or addiction shelters that we may not be aware of that have been integrated within areas that they would be able to say, actually, we're aware that there is a sensitive land use very close by, and they would like to be able to advise us that in a mechanism that we would be aware of and comment appropriately to. And again, the second option would be for council to completely opt out and prohibit cannabis stores within Collingwood. So the council, if they choose to opt out now, can opt back in at any time. However, if you opt in before the January 22nd deadline, you cannot opt out in the future. You're opted in permanently. So that is what we're looking at this evening. And basically now I will turn back to the chair, Mayor Saunderson, regarding the public meeting component. So again, we're looking at, do you support retail cannabis stores within Collingwood? Why or why not? And our regular delegation process. And sorry, before I turn it over, I'll mention that all the information that's presented here tonight will be available on our website tonight, if not by tomorrow morning, as well as I'm going to fully introduce our team. So we have Nancy Farrer, our Director of Planning and Building Services, our Director of Marketing and Business Development, which is Martin Whitlow. Lindsay Ayers is our planning technician, and Officer Baker is with our bylaw enforcement division.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I put the recommendation on the table, I'll look to the public then for public comments. You have a 5-minute timeline to come up and depute, and if you have comments, please come up and give us your name and address and your thoughts on the issue.
I might as well be first.
Thank you. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. My name's Paul Andrews, 241 Holden Street. And my comment is very simple. I come from a background of finance. I am familiar with the cannabis coming public, and I just want to address one other area that maybe has not been addressed tonight, is the area of edibles. What will be actually taking place in the future will be edibles, and those edibles could be in that private individual standalone store. I don't know the details because this is all new to all of us. And I think one of the things that we as a council and as a town should consider is that we can opt back in if we both know we are getting information that is not clear. And that goes whether we're looking at the federal level, the provincial level, or even at the municipal level. My suggestion is to opt out at this point in time. I'm not saying against it. I'm saying opt out. We can always hop back in. The financial benefits is minimal for staying in. And that's generally my comments. And I'd like to say thank you to the council.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor, this is just a small anecdote. But before most of you were born, in the 40s and 50s, alcohol was not allowed in Wasaga Beach. You probably don't realize that. It was allowed in Stainer and Collingwood, every place else. Wasaga Beach was quite a tourist area. So we either phoned up a taxi, or you came into Collingwood, and you got alcohol. If Collingwood goes for the this bylaw, under the proper regulations, I think the proper business will receive the tax benefit that will look after regulations of it. It's just an anecdote that I see as I relate back in my life what happened with alcohol. We're in the same situation with cannabis. Thank you very much for your time.
Before you leave, can I just get you to state your name? We'll put that in for him, Bing Jow.
I'm
Thanks,
sorry.
Bing. That's okay, I was asking for your name, Bing. But we got it.
I'm sorry.
I know you're hearing stuff. I was just getting you to state your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Most of you know.
We do know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor,
Good evening.
members of council. My name is Marie Maloney. I'm a resident of Collingwood. I guess my first comment has to do with Christopher Columbus when he went to visit Queen Isabella and wanted to sail across the ocean. And there was lots of wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth. People worried that he was going to fall off the edge of the earth. People have been consuming marijuana for millennia. There's plenty of folk history, there's plenty of folk medicine around marijuana. The chemicals in marijuana are being used today in various places for medicinal purposes, as we all know. There are people selling marijuana all over Collingwood today. Okay? We all know this, right? And I think we all know that there's a heavy criminal element involved in that. And in spite of the fact that there is a way to buy marijuana through the mail today, lots of people aren't doing that. They're still relying on their old dealers, and so they're still relying on the black market. I don't think we want that in Collingwood. I think what we want is user-friendly, citizen-friendly. I don't think that we want to shame anybody for choosing to use marijuana. It's legal. It's like alcohol. I was in the hospital today. I was in Barrie at the hospital, not here, but anyway, I was in Barrie, and I was talking to someone there. And they asked me about my alcohol consumption. And I admitted that, geez, I probably went through a case of beer a year, maybe 6 bottles of wine, and 1 bottle of alcohol. I mean, that's how much I drink. Now, most people, and I mean, I'm including teenagers, drink more than me. But I consume marijuana. And so I mentioned that to them. And she was, wringing hands and gnashing teeth, and because she doesn't know, because we don't have the science behind it. And The reason we don't have the science behind it is because it's been legal up until now. So hopefully our universities are going to start doing studies and we're going to start getting more information. But the truth of the matter is that you have people all over the municipality and people visiting from outside the municipality who are marijuana users. And they want to have access to it. Now, foolishly, I was in British Columbia on the day that marijuana was legalized, and I went to the Ontario store and placed an order to have sent to my place here. And then weeks later, I discovered that all of that data had been scooped up by somebody. Right? There was a breach on that Ontario cannabis store. And that was touched on in the presentation earlier tonight, that people are concerned about their privacy. So what I know now is I purchased marijuana, and now there are hackers out there that have my information. I'd rather walk into a store, show my driver's license if I have to, but I haven't been carded for a long time, and acquire what I want and leave. And it should be that simple. Now, honestly, I'm a person who's been using marijuana since I was 14 years old. I'm 63 years old now. I've earned in my life. I'm not the slacker that you hear in the movies and all the rest of that. I think that there's just, like I said, a lot of wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth, and it's not necessary. I personally wish that the municipality could have some greater control over where the stores were placed. I think it would be smart to have it sitting beside the LCBO or beside the beer store, or better yet, if council were able to designate an area within Collingwood that was an adult zone where, we might have a liquor store, a beer store, some clubs. I know that this is a popular notion in Collingwood, but maybe a strip club would be in the same place. Other things that, we don't want on the main street, but, this is a tourist town, so why don't we allow some of these things? Anyway, I'm drifting away from what I wanted to say. I hope that council will go ahead and approve allowing stores in town, and I need to ask a question now, because I know that from what I see in the agenda, this is about whether or not we will support stores, but what about production within Collingwood? Is that a separate issue?
Yes, production would be a separate issue, and there is, in the planning stages, I think, for a production plant in Collingwood.
And so, sorry, may I ask, so if I wanted to set up a production plant in Collingwood, would I be allowed to today or not?
It's a fairly intensive process and application, but if you had approvals, yes, you could apply.
Right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carolina D'Andrea. I'm actually a newly elected member of the BIA and also a local entrepreneur and a mother. So I'm speaking as all of those things, and I would just like to, bring up something that I haven't really heard addressed as much. Most of the comments have been relating to recreational use of cannabis, but I think we're also overlooking the fact that Collingwood is a community with a very high percentage of natural health practitioners, people seeking natural health and healthy lifestyle remedies and options. So I'd also just like to highlight that aspect of the cannabis use argument, is that it's actually creating a lot of opportunity for people to access a regulated product for health. I have personal experiences in family of people in end stages of life having to illegally procure cannabis for pain relief for a dying elderly family member. I think that's crazy. So I just also like to address the fact that it's not all about the edibles and the communities, which unfortunately is a part of it, but there's also a lot of very beneficial treatment to things like anxiety, epilepsy, and also the fact that people are able to access a product that is not on the black market, that is legal, where they are able to make informed decisions. And yeah, not everybody wants to go through the hassle of online. There's also a lot of other aspects there where you can't have a personal conversation conversation and potentially build a rapport with somebody in business. So my personal opinion obviously is that opting in is the right way to go. I also like to stress that there's lots of opportunity, I believe, within the cannabis market for things like tourism. I once attended a trade show where a comment was made to me, you know, this is a great event, but if I really wanted to do a good event, I'd be running a cannabis convention right now. And I think that's a very interesting point of view. So if Collingwood takes the position of opting out, which clearly the public opinion seems to be in favor for, we're kind of cutting ourselves off from creating a culture of healthy, innovative, and creative cannabis culture and cannabis use that's obviously going to be a little bit more mature and health-centered than, say, just the sort of classic stoner culture that people are associating with. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthew. I live in Collingwood. I'm 40 years old. The reason why I'm still alive today is because I believe the marijuana I've smoked in the past has actually maintained my health. It's quite interesting. I've been exposed to tobacco off and on since when I was like 15, downtown Collingwood, Pool Halls, the dances I used to go on, smoking everywhere in the bars and stuff. And I have a friend in town who smokes marijuana every day. He's a heavy tobacco smoker, and it's amazing. This man is still alive, and I do believe high use, regular, of marijuana at a certain time can prevent cancer. I think it's true. Now, with regards to slowing down, I think we have a lot of alcohol establishments in Collingwood and the village of Blue Mountain. I would like to see some signage in the area about, like, slow down, because this is becoming a big issue. Like, if we do opt in, which I think we should, for different reasons, and we need to get people to slow down. I couldn't believe the panic over Christmas and New Year's, people firing up First Street again. We need another light at Birch Street. We need to intensify Mountain Road all the way up to Osler Bluff Road.
We're going to stick with the.
Well, driving's an issue. If you get people behind the wheel, it's dangerous.
I agree with you. We'll note that.
Multitasking and too much stuff going on.
I don't want to get into traffic control. I want to just stay on the.
I would like to opt in, but I do feel we need to prepare ourselves with ski culture that's here now. I do believe we have to get people to slow down. It's very dangerous. Like First Street was amazing how many cars were up first over the holiday time. Now, I would like to explain from my perspective, my personal perspective. I've also spent a lot of money on marijuana. It's expensive, but a small amount of marijuana can go very far, and it's a good opportunity instead of like, it slows you down. And it's a good thing, but it's also nice to know what type of marijuana you're smoking, because there are differences. I would say we should opt in. We should, like the girl ahead of us said, about the medical aspect, the cannabis culture. We look at it in an interesting way, like what medical aspects of cannabis, especially like taking it home, for example. But I do have concerns for youth, because it's expensive. It is expensive. Very expensive. Yeah, it's very expensive actually. So we need to be aware of those costs. And it's an alternative to alcohol. Alcohol messes up your mind and it dries out your brain. So can cannabis. It can lead to some level of psychosis. I recommend a small amount of marijuana 3 times a week. Not every day. It's too much. Like 3 times a week is fine. But the slowing down part is important. That, to me, is if we take a responsible way of opting in, let's add a message, slowing down. You know, I think that's an informed opportunity. As things go on too, because with the online sales, that's a great thing. Slowing down, I like that message. Instead of that panic, it's mad. And we can do that here in Collingwood and say, oh, we got the shore to the bay and all this stuff, and safe by the water and all this, you know, and sobriety, like, but there's a transition thing with marijuana. It helps people that have been involved in trauma and other things to just transition a bit. Slows people down, but there is responsibility associated with this.
And that's enforcement issue. So
I would-
today we're just talking
yeah,
in or out, and
I
I know you
would-
want in.
In is fine with the slogan slowing down.
Okay, we noted that.
Okay,
Good,
excellent.
thank you.
Hello, Mayor, Council, thanks for having us up here. I just wanted to speak from my cap as a chef in the industry. I know Collingwood and the surrounding area really depend on,
Can't hear you.
oh, sorry, really depend on tourism from the area, especially the mountain. I know the LCPO is crazy over Christmas time. It's nice to see all those people in here. It's nice to have people spending money in the area. I feel like it would be good for the restaurant industry to have people coming up here, have their pot available. They're gonna eat more. They're gonna be buying stuff. It's good for me. I have lots of other issues, but I just want to address that. Thank you
That's a
very much.
pecuniary issue. And what's your name before you leave us?
Chris Malone. Thank you.
Chris Malone, thanks, Chris.
All right. Hello, my name's Scott Collis. Not very good at this, but I'm just gonna do the best I can.
Microphone, Scott?
So basically I've been working on a company for 2 years now, and I'm trying to open it up in Collingwood. I'm hoping you guys approve. I'm gonna be getting a patent, and it's gonna be involving a restaurant with smoked meats and poultry and seafood, available to the customer. You can buy it online, you can buy the materials to smoke the foods at home. The company's called Weedwood. And it's gonna be big, and I'd like to open a restaurant in Collingwood. That's
Scott,
it.
before you leave, are you for opting in or opting out?
Opting in.
Opting in, okay.
Alright, so, I got a website, everything's gonna be kicking up very soon. I'm just very scared about getting in trouble. So, I got a patent pending, I got lawyers, I got accountants. If you guys are interested, like I said, a restaurant with smoked foods, all different types, smoked chowders, soups, salmon, all these things available. And also again, the materials to smoke them at home. So we can make this company, it's gonna be the first of its kind. It'd be awesome to do in Collingwood, and once it hits the news, everybody be blown away, and it'd be Collingwood right above it. So, Weedwood. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right then, we will look to council. Okay, Martin, we'll get a last word to you then.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So just want to finish up with what our next steps are if you want to put on the final slide. First of all, once again, just a reminder that you can sign up front here for emails for regular updates as decisions get made related to cannabis. The finalized staff report will be going in front of council on January 14th. Once again, today was an important stepping stone towards preparing that staff report. The next key step is decisions are required to opt in or opt out no later than January 22nd. I believe we've already spoken to that. Important date, once again, that's a provincially dictated date. Next step is if we are opting in, if council decides to opt in, there should be consideration given to enacting a cannabis policy statement along with delegated authority. This would be part of the report going in front of council for our next council meeting. What is important about this is there's a statement to the province. If and how the comments are acted upon is really up to the province. So once again, we talked about this outside the 150 meter regulations. The rest of it are our comments to the province, and it is up to the province to then think about that. And the next step is staff to investigate and report back to council on opportunities to strengthen municipal smoke-free policies. And that's something that we worked on over the next few months. and that's obviously informed the changes happening with cannabis. And once again, we've talked about the separate piece around smoke-free policies that are part of the consideration set but are not directly related to the decision about retailing or not in Collingwood. Once again, hopefully this was a good presentation to council related to the question of allowing retailing or not in Collingwood. I did want to thank Sarah the clerk for leading things up to this point. I also wanted to thank Lindsay and Nancy from the planning department, Officer Cameron Baker from bylaw, and of course the rest of staff who are here also on what I think was an example of great collaboration that goes on at the staff level across the different departments. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent presentation to all of staff. So we'll put this on the table then, recommending that the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee support and refer the following staff report to the next regular meeting of council. The council receives staff report number C 2019-1 entitled Consideration of Cannabis Retail Stores in Collingwood for Information Purposes. It is mover and seconder, please. Mover, Councillor Jeffrey, and seconder, Councillor Hand. And I'll open the floor to for comments from council. Comments or questions, council? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I just have a question in regards to the schooling. So we have, on the map, it's very easy to read, but I'm wondering if a driving school, which is governed by the provincial government, is considered a school. I did look it up, and it's yes and no. So typical provincial government, yes and no. So I would like to find out, because if that does, that we have 3 located in the downtown core.
I don't know if Councillor Thomas or anyone has the answer to that, or if we need to look into that. Okay, I think the response is we'll look into that. Councillor Manning can get a question for this week. Okay, all right, sorry, Lindsay, come on up then, please.
In terms of schools and private schools, it is specifically as defined in the Education Act. The legislation speaks specifically to the Education Act. So public schools are defined, they're your traditional public schools that you would see. Private schools, the definition of a private school is it has to have at least 5 pupils of the age of compulsory education, which is 6 years old, that are attending school for curriculum or typical elementary and secondary school courses. So a driving school would not be considered a private school.
No, that's fine. It was just a question that I thought was very important to ask, because the people are going to arguably want to be in our downtown core. And if that slips by us, it won't only be an embarrassment, but it will be a hindrance to them locating there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I guess for going forward, something that would help me better on the understanding would be to have the overlay of the buffer zones over the commercial zoning, so we can see how it's impacting the commercial zoning. And with the addition of the other properties and any others that we missed, as Lindsay had referred to. The other thing I had asked at the last meeting if we were negotiating with the county with respect to the 50%, I saw in the report that their estimated amount received is $189,000, and I guess my question would be is, when do we have to negotiate a change in that percentage if it's not going to be 50-50? Do we need to have, is there a timeline that we would need to have that negotiation done with the county? I guess my other question would be that we're going to have specific costs with respect to the legalization of cannabis aside from the retail discussion. So those fundings going forward would help us with those. Is there any understanding through the county, are the OPP or those kinds of services receiving any funding directly from the province out of the coffers of those cannabis revenues?
I don't know that it would come from the county. It might be a question just for our local detachment, but we have to look into that.
Those are my questions.
Any other questions, council? Councillor McCollum, I know Councillor Hamlin is nodding over there. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question has to do with the cannabis policy statement, which will be what I understand will inform the potential store owners around our, and the province around our policies to do with sensitive uses in our community. And I look at the AMO precedent that our document was based on, and in that document they had specific examples of sensitive land uses. And I noticed, and I totally understand the shortness of time that staff had to deal with this, but our document, that's only in draft form, of course, before us at this point, just speaks to incompatible uses. And I'm just wondering whether it would be possible, should council decide to opt in to retail stores, to have a little more time to consider some specific sensitive uses that we would want to have taken into account. And I think it was Lindsay who mentioned tonight about the matters of public interest that the Alcohol and Gaming Commission will take into account in looking at locations. And there's only 3 things, and one is protecting youth and restricting their access to cannabis. So one of the things in particular on my mind tonight is parks. And locations where we know young people are going to play soccer or outdoor shinny, and it may not be the dog park so much, but I just would like to have additional time for staff and council to think about what are the sensitive uses that we would want in such a document. And as they say, it will be for the Alcohol and Gaming Commission to look at. It'll inform staff when they're reviewing applications for retail stores. And it may also help inform retailers who are coming forward to consider Collingwood as a location for a store, if they can see our particular desires as to where they should not be. Maybe they'd rather not have a tussle with Collingwood, and they would see, if they have a choice as to locations, they prefer if they weren't here, why don't I pick a spot over there? So just to come back then to my question, if council was to opt in for a store, for stores in town, would we be having an opportunity to defer the cannabis policy statements to have more input into what sensitive uses would be?
Certainly. So the policy statement was provided very draft and a basis to have the conversation today because we're seeking still additional input. So the envisioning staff report that would be finalized part of council's agenda package on Thursday would include a map based on the conversation. So looking at today, it would include the parks areas, the school areas with the buffer zones at that point, and not specifically in the map identify the other sensitive land uses, but note what we believe other sensitive land uses could be. And then council, whenever you receive that report on Monday at the regular council meeting on January 14th, if you're not satisfied with that, you would like to have more time after you see the polished document, you're welcome to make that decision to defer it.
Thank you.
Councillor Zab.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, am I directing questions to staff at this time or through your worship? I was wondering if I could find out whether there has been interest expressed at the Business Development, Economic Development Office of entrepreneurs who are looking for some advice at this point.
Through you, Mayor Saunderson, it's slowed down a bit in the last few weeks, but late in 2018, we probably had one a week coming in asking about retailing and opportunities to do retailing in Collingwood.
Thank you. My second question is regarding bylaw enforcement, and have we already, because we're heading into budgetary time of year, is there some budgeting taking place regarding signage and enforcement and that sort of thing? And do we have sort of a ballpark figure of what we're looking at regarding what it's going to cost us through you, your worship?
Whoever's going to take this, go ahead.
Or through the chair to the committee. I can confirm that the health unit is providing signage to us, so.
Yeah, this one?
Yes. So and then once we continue to monitor and look at the consumption and use of tobacco, or cannabis and vaping within the community, we may be looking at more of these, but we have a budget for signage. Right now, with respect to the retail component of it, if there's an application made for retailing, bylaw enforcement wouldn't really be involved unless there was a violation of a bylaw that was involved. If every business is required to apply for signage, a sign permit, so they'd have to go through the regular process, they would be required for that. They'd be required to have the appropriate building inspections that may be required, especially if it's a new use. There might be fire code requirements as well. So all that would remain intact as it would be for any business that operated. So we haven't budgeted right now any extra money for enforcement this year in bylaw enforcement. I know through our police service board and conversations with the ODP, they have one trained drug recognition expert within the town of Collingwood that's shared throughout the region. To date, I should say, as of the Friday before the holidays, that drug recognition expert services was only utilized once within the town of Collingwood. So they haven't seen the significant uptake that they were, worried about as well. So right now, just as what the province is doing, we're monitoring the situation. If we see that there's becoming an increasing issue, where I think that bylaw enforcement, and again, it's outside of the conversation today, might be more involved is when we take a look at individuals that want to start growing cannabis in their backyards. So.
Thank you very much.
So any others?
Through you, Your Worship, to Clark, if I could just follow up on the last question with regards to budget for enforcement. This isn't a comment on the use of recreational marijuana, and it's not, or cannabis, it's not a comment on whether we opt in or opt out. But given, and this is more sort of anecdotal, if you were to visit, say, the Village at Blue tonight versus the Village at Blue 3 years ago, there's probably a higher probability of people using recreational cannabis, say, within the main event plaza. And I see that as a trickle down to, going back to Councillor Hamlin's comments about sensitive uses or sensitive areas, that we will see an uptick in the use of recreational cannabis in our parks in close proximity to recreational areas. And therefore, just making that assumption, should we not be looking at increasing budgeting or allocating resources potentially for the next year to properly enforce and monitor these particular areas? It's more just a comment in that respect. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, okay, good, thank you.
And then if I may just, a question of clarification specific to the survey. 1,400 plus users, fantastic feedback, fantastic turnout. Just for the public, can we determine, were those 1,400 unique responses, or is it possible that we've got 2 or 3 individuals who replied on numerous occasions?
We can confirm that you can't enter the survey from the same IP address.
Okay. So the 1,400, it's possible there's maybe a few that have applied from different IP, but generally speaking, we've had a fantastic response. That's just for the public record. Okay. And last, if I may, just a comment. I'm concerned with regards to the 150-meter setback that's been established as it relates to the boundary of schools, only in the context that I don't think that it carries any weight. And I won't be surprised if it's challenged in the courts, and that it's perhaps that the 150 meters be turned down. And I base that simply on the fact that the province is running parallel to tobacco use. And I can buy cigarettes if I smoke across from Cameron Street Public School at the convenience store that's there. And I just think that this type, when they establish these types of boundaries, they're ripe for a court challenge, and I won't be surprised if 2 years down the road, the courts are opposed with these types of things. So I'm not putting any merit or weight on that as part of this decision, whether we opt in or opt out, as it relates to a store, because I just think that there are a number of things that, as Martin Rubel pointed out in his early presentation, that the legislation is fluid, and what we're talking about today could be very different in terms of a year or 2 years down the road.
You raised a very interesting point, and I'm going to pass it on to Clerk on this, but I do sit on the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, and I think we have to be aware that this cannabis legalization is coming in under the Tobacco Act. So under the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, a municipality has the ability to pass bylaws that can restrict where you smoke. So on top of this 150-meter overlay that we're asking for in the policy statement through the province, we have an ability in our municipality to further restrict where people can use smoke cannabis, vape, or cigarettes, and that's why the sign says smoking and vaping. So I'll pass it to the clerk, but my understanding is we as a municipality can pass additional restrictions that we are responsible for enforcing, so that it adds to the bylaw enforcement issue. Am I correct on that?
Certainly, through the chair, Mayor Saunderson, to the committee, from the enforcement perspective and why budgeting hasn't increased, and I alluded to earlier the issue of growing cannabis as well. Regardless, any cannabis charge investigation is completely through the police at this point. So any use of cannabis within the Smoke-Free Ontario Act that would be non-compliant to that is under the Tobacco Enforcement Officer, which is a provincial individual. But if council does choose to increase the areas greater than the restrictions in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, such as restricting it from parks and other areas on municipal trails, any other municipal public property, council would have to pass a bylaw at that point, and that's one thing that staff will be investigating over the next few months. But if council does want to restrict those areas, then yes, municipal bylaw enforcement would be responsible for doing the enforcement for the areas over and above the Smoke-Free Ontario Act.
Yeah, further follow-up?
Just a point of clarification. When I was on council in early 2011, I think, I had tabled a request, and Clerk Almus, you'll perhaps recall me assisting me with this, Councillor Lloyd, Kevin Lloyd at the time, seconded it, and that was to request to the province that the lower tier municipalities would have the ability to, in fact, actually create our basic our legislation as it related to where you could and couldn't use tobacco. And at that point, I wasn't requesting that we actually ban tobacco on the main street. What I was requesting is that we had the ability to do so if we so choose to do, and it was turned down. So how does that differ? I'm just looking for the clarification.
I'll pass that through the clerk.
Certainly, the only area, through the chair, the only area that can't be regulated is a highway, and that includes a sidewalk and a boulevard. So you can't restrict smoking on a sidewalk if it's part of a boulevard. You can restrict the sidewalk if it's a sidewalk through a trail that's not considered part of a highway. And that was basically the justification where we tried to petition the province to make them make the changes. However, that has not happened yet.
So can I, through you, and to members of the audience, I'm not trying to be ridiculous with these lines of questioning. I think it emphasizes how we have legislation that relates to gaming, alcohol, tobacco, and now cannabis. And quite frankly, I'll make this comment, and that is that as somebody who's followed politics, and I'm not making a comment whether you're liberal, conservative, NDP, or you support the Cannabis Party, this has probably been the most half-assed backwards piece of legislation from top down. And here we are tonight trying to figure out details as it relates to how we're going to enforce something by a simple opt-in or opt-out for a store that may or may not come, because now it's been legislated that, well, in the first round, only 50,000 communities of 50,000 will have that opportunity through a lottery, legislated by a government that is pro-business, that has put in some of the most anti-business legislation as it relates to cannabis. And this is just, as backwards as you possibly can get. I will now get down off my soapbox. What I just found, like, to your point, Clerk Aldous, and I respect your opinion because you're right. It is interesting though that, for example, we cannot legislate use on a sidewalk, but we can legislate the distance from the front door of an arena or the town hall, which is on a sidewalk, which is on a main throughway. But we're defined by a period or a location, and we can't move that distance from, I think it's the 20 meters that was on that sign, to a distance that's, say, encompassing of the complete downtown in that respect. And I'm not looking for a comment, I'm making that comment.
Is that enough?
Almost done.
I have one very quick question.
It's a very good question.
It is a question. Did the BIA provide any feedback?
No, they do not have an official position.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Any other council members?
I'll keep it brief, I promise. Just if we can get some clarity, Deputy Mayor just spoke to it, but I had the question before, so I just wanted to bring clarity to it. No matter what happens, let's be clear, we don't fit the basic requirements of 50,000 people, so we will not be getting it at all. We won't have the opportunity, so I'm wondering, I don't think I need that, my voice kind of carries. I'm wondering if we know, thank you, if we know when the next phase will open up of opportunity and if they will change the basic requirements. Because right now we're getting people either excited that this is going to happen or this is a committee, or pissed off that it's going to happen. And I don't want to do either. Because I don't want them to get excited that it's going to happen and then the government says, well, you don't fit the regulations anyways, so I don't even know why you're doing this. Or secondly, upset that they think it's going to happen because there's going to be 90 of them show up on the main street and we don't fit the requirements anyways.
Do you know when phase 2 will be?
We have no idea when phase 2 will commence. The only item that, and actually it was, our planner, Ms. Ayers, commented today that it's been confirmed that the edibles would be available before October 17th, but it didn't take into account when the second phase would be.
So having the opportunity to always opt back in, would it not be smart for the week that we have to think about all our options and try to understand the living document that's changed so much since it was first introduced? Because we're voting on something that we don't know what's going to happen. We're voting on something that when we vote in, whether they change it as they move forward, we're in. So again, it's not a comment whether we're voting for or against recreational use of marijuana, because as a retailer, I'm always going to vote for free enterprise. I believe that people should be able to do what they want. The feds have said it's legal, the province backs that up, who are we to question that? But point is we want to know what we're voting on and not just that. So that is my only question, and I will not comment on.
So I'll make a few comments and I'll pass it to the clerk. I think the crux of the matter that we're confronted with here, marijuana is legal. So you can get it online. You can also buy it black market. The risk of black market is that it's laced with something like fentanyl, and the opioid crisis is mushrooming, so there's safety issues. We're also looking at, you can opt out, and if you do, you can opt in at any point in time. But if you opt out, you're written out of the funding. You will not get any profit sharing, regardless of when we get a store, we allow the store. So the crux of the matter, as I distill it, is that if you opt in at this point in time, we know we won't get a store in phase 1. There's only 25 stores that are going to be across the province. 5 will be in the metropolitan Toronto, 11 will be in the GTA. We're part of a very large geographic area that stretches from here up to Huntsville and down to Ottawa, and there will only be 5 stores in that area, and we will not be getting one because we're less than 50,000. It is disturbing, but we have no control over allotting who gets a license and how many in our community. That's disturbing, so there are control issues. But at the end of the day, in terms of funding, we know that if we opt out for any period of time, we will not be in the funding model other than $5,000 a year for the next 2 years. So that's $10,000 to handle the bylaw enforcement. There is the other issue of how we can control the smoking envelope through the smoking bylaws, which would apply to cigarettes, vapes, and marijuana. And then you've got your own bylaw enforcement issues. So that's my distillation of what the issue is for us next week. And I would pass it to the clerk if I'd listen.
The chair, that is correct. The crux is this carrot that the province has put in front of municipalities. So you'll have to determine, again, the funding model is based on, and the reason why we have no numbers is the initial amount is $40 million over 2 years. So municipalities would receive an initial $5,000, and then above that it was based on a per capita. So our amount that was allocated for 2018 was about $15,000. So we won't know how much our allocation would be until the province knows how many municipalities have opted out. So the more that opt out, and if Collingwood opts in, would mean more money. Regardless, any of the funding that we receive has to go to areas, so like the policy development piece, the delegated authority, the staff time spent on enforcement and reviewing applications, on signage, on any social services. So if we have a shared, we have to share with the county. So right now it's 50-50, and we have to negotiate otherwise. It's all those components that would be covered if we opted in. So it really is nothing.
Councillor Dord.
Just through you to the clerk, are we also, is the province not going to make additional funds available to municipalities should the sales, the provincial sales of cannabis reach a certain level? I think it was 100 million.
That's correct.
If they keep the sales going. Right now, right?
That is correct. And they're well on their way.
Okay, Councillor Hamlin.
Okay, sorry, I have two more questions. One is, I had long thought, well, since I started thinking about this in the last year, that for Collingwood, it would be great if we could opt out and then watch everyone else go through all the problems, and then we saunter in and we save a lot of money. So as this is unfolded, it seemed to me, if we opt in, there's certain benefits financially and so on, but, you know, maybe others, they'll have to fix problems and we'll be part of the second wave or third wave. But I just wanted to, my question is, and I think it was Lindsay who mentioned this, and I just wanted to ask her if I understood her properly, that she said if others go, I wrote down this, if others go first and there are problems, you know, we might expect the province to change the rules. Is that what you said? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Lindsay or Sarah answer that.
Yeah, sure.
Certainly. I think I briefly touched upon it during the piece about the changing legislative landscape. And what the province has said and what they're continually doing is continuing to add regulations to the act, because there keeps being additions and changes and reconsiderations of various matters. So and it's going to happen. As one of the areas we attended an information session for municipalities and enforcement officers, in which we had the AGCO present, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Correctional Services. There was a number of ministries there, and they indicated that they felt, from the ministry perspective, that if there happened to be, but again, this was before the December 13th decision to eliminate it to 25, is that they would definitely be watching the number of cannabis outlets that start proliferating around the province and density of them. So that could happen. So if phase 2 isn't going to be until next fall, next year, you know, at least we have the ability to watch, and whatever changes the province continually is going to be making, we'll be able to get smarter and smarter, because we're going to start with a policy document and keep adding to it when we keep seeing issues arise that we think is very important for our residents, and maintaining the safety, the health of the public, as well as the youth, restriction and access to cannabis, as well as the illicit crime activity.
Okay, that's great, thank you. My second question is about where the stores would be allowed. And I just wanted to ask, through you, Mr. Mayor, to perhaps our planning director or whoever she might suggest is better, but how exactly does the province describe the land uses or the zoning for which these would be allowed, where these would be allowed?
Who wants to answer that?
I think perhaps Lindsay, you can, because you know, you've done an awful lot of research on this, and you've probably done more of the research than I have actually. But my understanding is that it's vague, and that's part of our problem, is that it describes it as being retail, but is it any kind of retail? Is it a specific kind of retail? Is it just general retail? As I think in some of our maps, we indicated that there's only really 2 areas in the town of Collingwood where we allow general retail commercial establishments. One of those being the downtown core, and the other being out by Canadian Tire area. Those are the only 2 areas in our town where we allow general retail. But what is not clear to me, and ask anybody else if it is clear to them, whether if you have a zone where we allow a pet store, for example, and we only allow a pet store, where you could you have a pot store as opposed to a pet store, when the zoning bylaw only allows a pet store. And I'm sorry, I'm not clear as to how that will be treated, and I don't know, Lindsay, whether you have anything. I think it's pretty foggy at the moment, and that they could potentially allow a pot store where our zoning only allows a pet store.
So, but it would be, I totally understand what you're saying, and have inquiries been made of the province as to this discrepancy that you've noted?
My understanding is that, certainly some questions have been asked. There is no answer that we have received, right? We don't have any other information at this point. I'm correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we don't have any other information than what we have.
So my question then is whether, should council decide to opt in, whether we would be able to pull together a staff report on the exact planning issues with recommendations to the province on how the retail zones should be described. And where I'm coming from is I think because no one's really turned their mind to what is retail, and every municipality probably has their own definitions, they may need to be informed a bit about what is, how bylaws are generally read and are, structured in different municipalities. And do you see this as something where we could, say even, this is how ours works, we recommend it be such and so?
It's my understanding that certainly, and it would be my thought, through the mayor to Councillor Hamlin, that we could make those kinds of points, but I have no comfort that the AGCO is going to listen or respond. It's my understanding that certainly could we submit something to them saying that this is the way we feel it should work in our community, and this is what we feel would be an appropriate course for approval of this kind of facility within the town of Collingwood. I think we could prepare something and say, this is how we define retail, this is in our view what would be the appropriate course. I just have no indication that they are prepared to expand their current rules or expand the information that they have given us to date. And I simply don't know.
All right, and through you, Mr. Mayor, my last question is the map that's been prepared showing the red and yellow commercial zones. Are these all the areas where retail of any kind is allowed in Collingwood?
That would be what we've done is we've indicated on a map where every single kind of retail is, and some of those commercial zones, it is very, to be very clear through Mayor Saunderson, is that some of them it is very limited retail. For example, on the map we indicated the areas where we allow hotels. Now the only kind of retail you can have in a hotel is usually some kind, I'll call it a tuck shop, sort of in the lobby, that kind of retail. But technically that is a variety of retail because you can buy certain things in a hotel. Now for it to be a cannabis retail, it would have to be, as far as I understand it,
a separate cannabis store with its own walls all around it, as opposed to something that you went through the hotel to get to. But on that map, we have indicated every single property where we thought you could sell anything. For example, I think we even put car dealerships on there. I don't know how you can have car dealerships and a retail cannabis in the same, but anyway.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Follow-up question to Councillor Hammond's question to our Director of Planning through Your Worship. Just when you say standalone store, and I've been some confused on this, does that mean it can't be on a plaza? Or does it have to be like its own all four walls, not touching anything else?
Thank you, and I can certainly give you what my understanding of that is through Mayor Saunderson. What it is it could be within a mall, for example. So, but what it can't be is, from what I understand, is like you sell cigarettes in a convenience store. So it has to have its own walls around it, as opposed to being just behind the counter you buy cigarettes. It can't be that kind of setup. You pick up your milk, pick up your cannabis, head to the front counter, and away you go. So it has to be its own unit. Correct? Am I right? Yeah, okay. And my understanding is that's okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, I have just one last question, and it's been noted a number of times in comments. The 1,420 odd responses we received in terms of past surveys, is that normal, large, really large? Where does that put us?
Through Your Worship, it's very significant. I think the only survey that I'm aware of was the parks. I think it was the waterfront master plan. And what was the numbers for that?
2,000.
About 2,000. That was over a 6-month period.
Yeah.
And we did this in 1 month. We got 1,400.
So we've got the recommendation on the table then, and I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? I think that was unanimous. That was unanimous. So the next item on the list, which no one paid attention to because we've been so busy with that one, is the Municipal School Board Election Accessibility Provisions, item 5.2. And recommending that the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee support and refer the following staff report to the next regular meeting of council. The council received staff report C-2019-2 with respect to all actions implemented during the 2018 municipal election that enhanced accessibility for information purposes as required in accordance with the Municipal Elections Act. And I will pass it over to Thomas.
Certainly. Would you like to stand up?
Whatever's more comfortable for you, but it's probably more better for you in terms of the microphone up there.
So this will be short and sweet. This is actually a requirement of the Municipal Elections Act, is to report on whether your municipality operated its election in accordance with franchising all its electorate to be able to vote, eliminating any barriers and applications that we put in place. You are required to have a plan. We did have a plan in place, and this is a result of our plan. So council agreed to pursue the internet and telephone voting, and so that is what occurred in 2018. So right off the bat, that allows individuals to vote from the comfort of their own home at any time, anywhere, within the 10-day voting period. That was October the 12th to 22nd. Not only did this method provide flexibility to the voter, it demonstrated itself to be quick, easy, secure, completely anonymous. However, we did have other issues, as you're fully aware. However, within the reporting requirement, we have to touch on the various areas. So there's some key areas. So that's the Voter Help Center, the voter registration, our communications, and then what we did during our emergency measure when we implemented the second day to allow the final votes to be cast on October the 23rd. So our Voter Help Center was located both at the town hall prior to the 10-day voting period, and during the 10-day voting period, it was here at the library and municipal office facility. Again, our facility is fully accessible with accessible access through doors. We ensured that our voter help center here at the library had individuals that were sworn to secrecy, that were able to assist any individual that required extra assistance. We provided items within each of the polling booths that we had set up with magnifying glasses. We also had a station that had extra large screen options that were available. Everything was touch screen, so the people that had any dexterity issue with operating a mouse or a keyboard were required to have to maneuver through that process. We also had a roving help center. So this is something that is above and beyond what any other municipality has done that I am aware of. We've got accolades from our neighboring municipalities. But we had started this process unofficially in the last election and agreed to promote it more this election, that if you were unable to attend the help center, we would actually physically go to your location. So we announced that with various organizations that we attended during our speeches. We advertised that information when people called in, if they had any frustration. Again, the biggest frustration was the phone system because it took a longer period of time. It was a more computerized or robotic audio voice that was hard to decipher. So we actually immediately made changes to allow that to, so basically what happened was during the audio voice in certain areas, it was too close together. The words were very close, so you couldn't understand the number in particular of candidates they could select for the position of councillor. So we immediately contacted our provider. They made the requisite change within a couple of hours, and that was, we never heard that complaint again. However, if we did receive any concerns from an individual, even there was a couple that had their own internet disruption issues that they had contacted us, we tried to help them through it. However, we actually attended their property and worked through the system with them. We brought our own tablet with us. We were able to use a hotspot off of our wireless device in case it was actually their internet that was compromised. So we actually assisted, I don't have the number offhand, but it wasn't significant. It was very manageable. And again, though, anybody that was had a significant concern, they were told to come in, and they were more than welcome to come into the facility. But it was those individuals that had mobility issues as well as transportation issues to get to the help center. All of our communications were done through our various channels, so it included radio, so audio, newspaper, website, through our social media accounts. We were out in the public at the various farmers market, being as accessible to our voters as we could be. We provided a number of videos also available to the public on the process. What we put into place during the issue that happened on October the 22nd with the broadband being incapable of taking on the number of voters that left voting till the last minute, we actually implemented an extension. So we extended it for one additional day, and we went over and above our communications to ensure that the public was aware that this is what we were doing. Again, that second day, we made house calls where they needed to provide house calls. We provided radio advertisements. We provided billboards up the side of the street. We had staff attending various daycare facilities, doctors' offices, clinics, anywhere that there was a bulletin board that we put up so that it was visual to anybody that could see it. And then we also extended our online voter registration. That was another component of accessibility that we needed to ensure. So as long as we had an appropriate policy in place, what we did this year, again, that was over and above what other municipalities had provided, was a process on accepting online registration. So if you didn't receive your voter information in the mail, you could call in or you could email in to provide your identification to us, and we had a process that we went through to ensure that that person was qualified and eligible to vote through various confirmations. We even conducted reference checks, and we're able to issue them voter pins so they could access the system. So overall, we believe that we're satisfied with our accessibility enhancements that we had this year. However, we will be reevaluating the alternative voting methods for the next election, and that will come forward in a report that has to be presented to you as a council in the year before your final year this term for consideration. Any questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'll open it to the floor. If there's any comments from the public, questions or comments from the public. And if not, then I will put it forward to council. So seeing none, I guess we'll get it on the floor. So, we're doing that. Yeah, I'm recommending, so recommendation 5.2, recommending the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee support and refer the following staff report to the next regular meeting of the council. Can I get a mover and seconder on that, please? Moved by Councillor McLeod, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Council, any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm looking through you to Clerk Collins. What the curiosity was the amount of 55% discount.
So our entire election budget, I believe, was around 80,000. To date, we're around 63,000. The services of Dominion Voting, the total amount of their proposed contract was about 32,500, and it was broken down in phases where the services provided up to certain dates. So the outstanding amount is $12,000, and our bill is, I believe, approximately 52 to 5,500. So savings of 6,000 to 7,000.
Councillor Jeffrey. Was that it, Councillor Brown? Yes. Okay, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I guess this will go more to the next report, but in terms of, I think I heard a question earlier at a council meeting regarding the demographic of voters and how we did in terms of getting as many people as possible within all of the demographics. I did hear the city of Thunder Bay, and I don't know if there were others, did a hybrid model where you could still vote with paper and attending personally, but also had the electronic, and they had 2 numbers to go with that. So I thought that was really interesting that we didn't have to pick between the demographics that might use our single choice. Although the telephone I thought was going to be able to offset that, but I don't think in the end it did. And the other thing that came to my attention was because there was no advanced polling, those who were leaving town for the period of electronic voting where there would not be access to internet would not have an opportunity to phone in on an international phone line to vote. So I think that is important because we're all very well traveled anymore. So to have a fixed voting time makes it a little more difficult. So other than that, I think our staff did an exceptional, exemplary job on operating what we asked you to do for that election. And so I thank you for that, but I did have those couple of things.
Council, any questions? Sir, just before you sit down, I did have one question. My understanding is 2014 we had 51% roughly turning, and this time we were at 48, so we dropped 3%. But having said that, I think we were still the highest in the county by quite a large margin, and our decline, other municipalities lost significantly more. So maybe this is a subject of another report, but just wondered what your thoughts were on overall how we held it in terms of our voter turnout across the county.
Certainly, through your worship to the committee, we were very excited to try this new alternative voting method this election term, and I think it's been the last 5 years prior to this, 5 elections, if not 6 elections, that we've had mail-in ballot only. So we were hoping for higher numbers, but still, because Collingwood has always been very high with our voter turnout. So even though we didn't reach the same as we did with the vote by mail and seeing what had happened, we're still very happy with 48%, but we have big goals for 2022.
We all of us do. Thank you. All right. So then I will call the vote. On recommending that Strategic Initiative Standing Committee support and refer the following staff report to the next regular meeting of council. The council receives staff report C 2019-2 with respect to all actions implemented during the 2018 municipal election that enhanced accessibility for information purposes as required in accordance with the Municipal Elections Act. Call a vote then, all in favor? And that is unanimous. On to item 5.3, policy D-20, fit for duty. Melissa, are you going to quarterback that?
Good evening. I'm going to be highlighting the report, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Blanchette, who's our health and safety coordinator, to provide council with highlights of the policy. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the town of Collingwood as an employer is responsible to provide a safe and healthy workplace. And our employees, volunteers, and contractors are required to report to work in fit conditions to perform their jobs safely and efficiently. So impairment in the workplace raises issues of risk to safety of staff and the public, productivity issues, and breaches of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, a few years ago, a substance use policy was drafted prior to the legalization of recreational cannabis to address the issue of drugs and alcohol in the workplace, and had not been brought to council for final approval. So in light of the recent legislation, we took that policy, revised it to ensure it encompassed recreational cannabis in the workplace, and we named it Fit for Duty policy. And in future, it will also be expanded to encompass other forms of impairment such as fatigue. So I think one of the points we want to make tonight is that the issue of impairment in the workplace by cannabis or other types of substances such as alcohol or drugs really has not changed. So with the adoption of the policy as we presented tonight, once that is approved, staff and supervisors will be educated on their obligations, rights, and duties under the policy. And supervisors will also be receiving specific training on how the Occupational Health and Safety Act applies to drug and alcohol in the workplace, how to recognize signs of impairment, and how to investigate impairment. Now, something that I omitted from the policy, the cost of the training for approximately 35 supervisors is, we budgeted approximately $6,000, but that has been included already in the health and safety budget line in our draft operating budget. All right, so I'm just going to turn it over to Michelle to highlight the policy and also what we've been doing from a health and safety perspective.
Okay, so included in that workplace policy that we that's new is the general conduct. So really, it's the reporting fit to work. We also have education and awareness, so that's providing awareness of verbal and written communication, such as knuckles and fact sheets to the workplace, to all the employees. We've also provided online training, as well as we're going to have some hands-on training coming up this year that Melissa just spoke about. Also in that policy, there's recognizing impaired behaviors. So it's really just some examples. It's not all encompassing. There's also the duty to disclose, that's reporting unfit to work. And then violation if you're not reporting. So there's the violation of reporting response. And then what goes with that is the investigation piece. So it does outline how to do an investigation. It's an example of it. Access to treatment, which goes along with return to work and accommodation, as well as a drug testing piece to it. So we do have some training, as Melissa said, coming up. The substance abuse training that was online had talked about dangers of substance abuse and recognizing signs and symptoms. So you'll see that in the policy, but as well they would have received the training and how to get help. And then the training that we have coming up for managers and supervisors, again, same kind of thing, how to recognize the different kinds of impairment, as well as how to conduct an investigation.
Okay, I'll ask for comments from the floor. Anyone have questions or comments about that presentation? Seeing none, then I'll turn to council. And we'll get this on the floor. So recommending that strategic initiatives, standing committee support and refer the following staff report to the next regular meeting of council. That council approve policy D20, fit for duty as presented. Can I get a mover and a second, please? Councillor Madian, Deputy Mayor Hall. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Burrow.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Two, I guess, you to either Melissa or Sarah. The policy applies to employees. Is our code of conduct for us as up to date as this, or does it need to be adjusted?
We'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. And then secondly, in the policy statement where it says volunteers, does that include board and committee volunteers, or is this just for?
Through you, it will also encompass our volunteers such as the members on boards and committees.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may ask for clarification, it says here that the town does not engage in pre-employment or random drug and alcohol screening.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's going to stay in place? I'm just curious, given the nature of a lot of our work there.
Yes, so at this time, the town does not engage in any pre-employment testing for drugs or alcohol. The provisions of the policy, though, will allow, if there is an incident where we suspect impairment may have been involved, we will conduct testing at that time. There's a very high threshold to allow for an employer to do drug testing, and at this point, it's a bit of a minefield. We haven't required it to this point, and we don't see any reason to change that just with the legalization of recreational cannabis.
Thank you so much.
I have a question. Just on the distinction between medication and recreational use, if somebody is on medication by prescription, are they under an obligation to come and advise the town?
So, yeah, they're under an obligation to provide that information to either the manager or human resources, to let us know, so that in that way we can accommodate, make sure that either, they're fit for work and we can make that accommodation plan.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is unanimous. And that brings us to the end of our program for tonight. So any public delegations? Anyone that would like to speak to council on an issue? Mr. Fryer, come on forward. This is pro forma, but state your name for the record, please.
Yes, as required. Tim Fryer, 75 Georgia Manor Drive. Good evening. Happy New Year. Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor Hall, members of council, staff. I want to take this opportunity provided by this meeting to, and actually I meant to talk into this because having gone in the streaming, it's very important that you talk into the mic because it is very hard to hear when you're listening on the computer. So I wanted to take the opportunity, as I said, to present to you, and I'll be mindful of the 5-minute window. I wanted to speak in regarding some questions I have generally pertaining to the reports presented at the December SIC meeting. I did have an opportunity to attend that meeting, so I'll preface here that if anything I inquired about was addressed at that meeting, I do appreciate that this is a chance to review it further and do it now. Regarding the agenda item, priority item on the proceeds of the sale of assets, most of my questions center around the summary update paragraph on Colas Power Stream court transaction. I recognize though that the limited details that were provided were there really, it was really there only there for the best estimate at the time and then context to the overall subject of the report. So I thought that a general question at this time would be the best way to proceed. Does council plan to have a detailed report presented at a future SIC meeting that will fully outline the major components that determine the ultimate net proceeds of the sale transaction?
I'm going to look for the treasurer to answer that, but my takeaway from the SIC meeting last December was yes. And so I'll look to Marjorie for the answer to that.
That would be a decision, through you, your worship, that will be a decision of council to direct to staff report.
mean, I think the expectation is that we'll bring forward a report to council on that basis, because we also need to go out and seek public input on how we spend that proceeds. So at some point in time, once the reconciliation is finished and we're able to determine the net proceeds, or I suspect we'll bring a report back to council for their consideration and information. So the short answer is yes.
And thank you for the confirmation on that, because I think if that's the case, my concerns with the updated information, they're mostly relating back to my questions that I raised back in October when council received the report, the first update report, and I think it could be covered with the final content of that report. So, and then of course it's in an SIC format, so it provides the public opportunity to speak. So I was going to be able to leave the specific questions that came to mind when I looked at the detail in that paragraph till then. The other aspect of what was in the report was regarding the financial statements. And as it's noted in the report, they're being finalized. So would the financial statements be part of that final report? And one of the reasons I'm asking is financial statements have generally been, up until last year, have been presented to the public for the corporation. They weren't received formally last year, but they were on the website. So they're accessible, that's no problem. But of course, there's no website now. So that's why I'm asking, would the financial statements be part of that final report? And that's how they'll get issued to the public.
Through your worship, which whose financial statement?
Collis's financial statements.
That would be Collis's prerogative, right? We have no control over that.
Okay.
We will receive final statements as part of our reconciliation effort.
Yes.
What Collis Forestry determined to put on their website as part of their legacy, I think will be up to them.
But they don't have a website anymore. That's why I was asking. Collis isn't continuing, right? It's gone down for EPCOR. I wouldn't expect EPCOR would put them on.
EPCOR, I understand from Kirk, does have past financial statements on.
They will be putting them up? Okay, so.
They have put all the past ones.
So
the expectation would be they.
You can't speak for
I did look at the site even just a couple of days ago, and I wasn't able to see them. So I appreciate that clarification.
Have a look, but obviously that's EPCOR's decision, so we don't have a role.
Mm-hmm. So realizing that time won't allow me to get into much on the staff report T 2018-11, which was on the 2019 fees and charges. The meeting minutes indicated that there was discussion back then about water billing, which is one of the areas of interest that I have, and some of that might be covered at the meeting. Also, there's an appropriate reference in the staff report to all user fees, most applicable, the water charges being calculated on a full cost recovery basis. So the expectation is that cost allocation process will be in place for the preparation of 2019 budgets to go to full cost recovery for delivery of water services. The 2019 water budget will be a very important part of the 5-year financial plan that will determine the 2020 to 2024 rate study outcomes. And so I'm going to just make those comments and wait until the SIC public meetings that occur around that to make any get a further understanding on how it progresses. So with that, I'll close just by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to speak with you. Very interesting meeting. The aspect of the cannabis and all the things it relates to. It's a very tough decision to be making for council. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other delegations? Seeing none, and I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councilor Jeffrey? I don't know if I need a second for that. I don't think so. So I'm going to call it vote. All in favor? We're done here. Thank you.